Today we're going to be talking about how to catch white sea bass from sport boats. I'm joined by my friend Anthony from Sav-On Tackle. Anthony is just a wealth of knowledge and is so very helpful. And so today we're going to be talking about how to catch white sea bass. We're going to be looking at the rods and reels as well as the terminal tackle and gear that you need to be able to catch them. In part 2, we're going to be actually talking about the techniques and how to actually catch and target the white sea bass. But Anthony, I've actually never caught a white sea bass from sport boat. I've caught a few from shore. Can you give us a little bit of introduction as to what are white sea bass? Why are they so coveted? Why do we want to catch them so bad? Give us a little bit of an introduction if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely the white sea bass are one of the more elusive fish for a lot of anglers on our coast. Definitely a very, very good fish to eat when you do harvest one, and that's one of the reasons a lot of people continually chase them down. There's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason to it, you know, until you start fishing them enough and start understanding a little bit more about it. But even then, as soon as you think you have it dialed in, they throw a little curveball at you. It's really about putting time in, and a big part of that is just being prepared with the right gear so that when you are putting the time in and you see conditions change, you know how to adapt to those conditions so you could stay in that best possible bite zone with the fish.
I don't know actually anything about any of the techniques, so I think dropper loop's one of them, but can you kind of break down some of the tackle that we have here and that's popular for targeting them?
Yeah, absolutely. The deckhands are going to be like instrumental in helping you gear up, so pay attention. The deckhands do it, they're out there, they do it for a living. So they're going to definitely throw tips at you on what they saw the day before. But having a variety of stuff ready to go on the fly is huge. If you have a couple rods and reels, rig them up differently. Let the crew help you rig it up. You know, those guys see a lot of things change day to day. But your basic techniques, your basic gear is going to be some larger hooks, larger J hooks. One of the crowd favorites is going to be the Owner Aki Twist. That's going to be, if you do any kind of research on going and targeting white sea bass, it's a hook that's constantly brought up for a reason. It's very, very good for pinning on your live squid, keeping them on the hook, and presenting it down to the white sea bass. They come in a variety of sizes. I recommend anywhere from like the 6.0 all the way up to the 9.0. That's going to be based on the size of the squid that you have at the time. You don't always know what the squid's going to be when you get there, so maybe the day before they had smaller squid, but then you go back to the bait barge and they all happen to be larger. So I do recommend a little variety, but you don't have to get every single size. You might get like 6.0 and 8.0.
It sounds like the ideal bait to have. Is it the only bait that you use? Can you use sardines, anchovies? And also, what happens if you don't have live squid? Can you use cut dead squid?
Yeah, definitely. You can use fresh dead is also very effective if the boat has it and maybe they're not able to get the live bait, but the fresh dead is there. There's a lot of techniques that have been popping up in the last couple of years. There was a window of time we had a lot of red crab around. There's still a lot of scuttlebutt about, you know, the red crab bite that was happening with the white sea bass. And for a time, we were using little tube jigs like this in a reddish color that was outproducing the squid. Last year, I would say that a lot of the fish, the newer technique that was being used, or the newer bait that was being used, was going to be the larger white fluke. So this is the Zoom 7-inch super fluke. That was a very good one. There's a few other brands out there that make some large flukes, but basically go to your shop, find something in a 7-inch or bigger white fluke, and be able to present that on a big weedless wide gap. The Warbait made the neck breaker, which was a great option to rig it up. Wow. And it was on that free swinging, you know, but you can also use like an Owner beast hook, or there's plenty of other rigging options. But anything that you can use to present that larger white fluke, even just a regular old lead head. Another great technique is, you know, just the standard white tube jig. Maybe there's a little more current. You want to be able to cast a little bit further because you are on a sport boat. Maybe they're not able to get as tight to the island as you want to be fishing at that time, especially during the early morning and daytime bite. So, you know, a larger white tube jig is something that you can cast and get up in there. We'll also go to the lead head and squid, a very, very good technique, a very popular technique. I like using it, especially when there's not as much current. I can go to a really, really light lead head with a really heavy duty hook. I can thread my squid on there, and sometimes even 2 squid on one hook, and slowly drop it down through the water column. And when there's not much current, that gives you an opportunity to keep that bait presented to those fish for a longer period of time as it slowly sinks out. And a lot of times you'll get caught in the current and just kind of swim back and forth like 2 squid hanging out.
So assuming that the conditions line up, it's kind of a more finesse way to present it, and obviously
Absolutely.
much more tantalizing for the fish, as long as the current is not too bad.
Exactly. Yep, and then you'll have your standard dropper loop. You know, for your dropper loop, we showed you the hooks. You're gonna have a variety of weights. Some of the more common sizes are gonna be the 6, 8, and 10 ounce weights. I definitely recommend having those in your arsenal. If you wanna have a variety of hooks and you don't wanna add the lead heads in as well, you can also get a sliding sinker. Like, it'll give you a very similar action to the lead head. So you could just take a generic sliding sinker anywhere from a 1/4 ounce all the way up to a 1 ounce, and put it above your owner Aki twist or any other large J hook and start sliding that down through the water column. If you go for the standard white jig, you'll read a lot about it. The white jigs are a great opportunity to drop down and just, you know, hit the bottom, take 5 or 6 cranks off the bottom and just let it sit there in gear and just let it sit there. Pin a live squid onto these big J hooks. When you go to the shop, you'll see the same jig with either the treble hook or the large J hook. I recommend getting the large J hook so that you could pin your fresh dead squid or a whole live squid on there, or even a mackerel if you so choose, and just drop it down and keep it right off the bottom.
Just to reiterate what I said in the beginning of the video, this is just an overview of the techniques that we use and how to target them. He's introducing the recommended gear. We're gonna break it down and actually show you how to use this stuff and how to set some of this stuff up, especially for those of us that are wanting to learn, that maybe want to go on a boat for the first time to hopefully try to catch one of these white sea bass. Season's coming up. When does the season typically kick off for white sea bass?
So the springtime, it's going to be water temperature related. When the biomass of squid starts coming down and gets closer, we'll see the sea bass usually start getting active. We have sea bass year round. They're going to be in anywhere where there's kelp. There's typically going to be sea bass, and I should say growing kelp, not kelp offshore. But anytime you see kelp on the coastline, there's a really good possibility of there being sea bass living in there year round. And sometimes they're eating fin bait more so than squid. But when we see that biomass of squid come down in the spring and they're settle into the islands and the local coastal areas, you'll see those white sea bass really activate, and you'll see the biomass of sea bass that come down and migrate with them, you know, staying on that squid.
Okay, so yeah, stay tuned. Be sure that you're subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss out the second part, which is actually how to use some of these techniques. But Anthony, you want to talk about some reels and rods and how that works with some of the gear that you talked about?
Absolutely. So we have a variety here. There's a lot of options. Sea bass reels are not very complicated. That's the beauty of fishing sea bass. You can break down, you know, anything that you already have and pretty much turn it into a sea bass reel. Some of the features that I look for in my sea bass fishing gear, for my leadhead and squid, I like using low profile bait casters. It makes it a lot easier to cast lighter baits and get some better distance on them. You have anywhere from the Tranx 400 HG, you've got the Lexa 400 as well. I do recommend the HD Lexa if you go that route, because it's going to have the stainless steel gears for the saltwater. Both are very good options for presenting the lighter baits for the white sea bass.
I was actually pretty surprised by this because I always assumed that white sea bass was deeper water and using heavier gear. So it's actually pretty eye-opening for me, and it sounds a lot more fun actually to target them with finesse techniques and with, you know, smaller reels like that.
Yep. If the conditions allow for it, then that's definitely a great technique. You know, sometimes that current's ripping a little bit too much, and you know, it's harder to fish the lead heads on your lighter setup, so we're going to switch to our dropper loop setup.
You got to do what you got to do.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
And you know, you're on a sport boat, there might be anywhere from 15 to 30 other guys on that boat with you, all trying to sea bass fish. And you could imagine you're going to have you're covering all different spectrums of the water column with everybody's own special technique and rig, and it gets fun. So what I recommend is be able to dropper loop fish, you know, be able to drop your 6, 8, 10 ounce weight. Typically we're fishing them anywhere from like 60 feet of water or shallower, occasionally deeper, but typically 60 feet or shallower. You'll have, you know, some of your larger reels that'll accommodate the dropper loop. The 2-speed reels are not necessary at all for white sea bass fishing. You actually don't want to pull super hard on a white sea bass because you will rip the hooks out of their mouth. So it's not like you're in for a long drawn out battle with a big giant fish. But what does happen when we're white sea bass fishing is you'll encounter a larger bat ray or stingray. You'll encounter larger black sea bass that could be a couple 100 pounds in weight in the same zone that we're fishing the white sea bass. So one of the nice things about going with a 2-speed option is that if you do hook a black sea bass, you're not sitting there fighting it for a long period of time, hoping it either breaks off so you could re-rig or you get it in fairly quick. You just pop it in low gear, crank the fish in a lot faster, get a lot more leverage on those bigger fish that you're not targeting. That way you can get back to work on the game fish that you can harvest. Something like the Penn Fathom is an affordable 2-speed reel that lets us go out, fish the white sea bass. It comes in some narrow options. It comes in the 25 narrow, which is a really, really good option so that you can fish offshore for tuna, yellowtail, white sea bass. You can do your rock fishing with it. It's a great all-around reel for SoCal, but definitely for that white sea bass, it's a crowd favorite. It does come in a 15 extra narrow option as well. This happens to be the Penn Torque, but it also comes in the Penn Fathom. So based on the price point that you want to keep it in, the Penn Torque is going to run you closer to 600 and the Penn Fathom is going to run you closer to that 300. Really, really narrow. So it's kind of nice. You really don't have to put any effort into guiding that line back and forth while you're white sea bass fishing. It's small enough that you can, and with good enough free spool, you can fish your leadhead and squid. Or if you want to bump up and fish your dropper loop, it'll handle it with the white sea bass really well. Shimano makes some great options. You know, we covered the Tranx 400. They also make the Trinidad 16 and the 16 narrow. Both are great options in the Star Drag. They're going to be a higher price point reel. They also make in the Lever Drag a Talica 10. Definitely an incredible sea bass reel. It's a little bit wider, so you're going to be guiding that, paying attention to that line a little bit more as you're guiding it on. But definitely lots of drag out of this. It comes in a single speed or a 2-speed option based on what your needs are. And it's a nice low profile reel. So for some of the lighter rods that we use for fishing the leadhead and squid and some of the techniques, it pairs up really, really nicely while still giving us a lever drag option. Like we talked about, Akuma has some great options. Daiwa has plenty more options. Basically, we're showing you the more common reels that are purchased through the store here for targeting white sea bass. But in reality, you want to make sure you're getting something in the similar size. So whatever brand you go with, you're looking for reels in this size to accommodate your lighter dropper loop setups and your lighter leadhead presentations, whether it be your leadhead and fluke, your tube jig, or your leadhead and squid.
Yeah, and I've said it time and time again, support your local shop. And so as Anthony's talking about reels, and we're going to jump into rods here in just a second, most importantly, come in, support your local shop, let them help you. Ask the questions, feel the reels and rods in your hand, and make sure that it suits your needs. But Anthony, you want to talk about some rod suggestions?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a handful of rods that I really like fishing for my white sea bass, but really anything that has a softer tip and transitions into plenty of backbone is a great option. So if you have your older glass rods and that's what you like using, you can use a 270 8-foot heavy. You can use an 870 if you want to go with some of the more modern rods that incorporate some graphite or graphite blends. You can go to like an 800 mH, and that's going to be whatever brand you decide to go with. On the leadhead and squid applications, I like fishing an 8.5-foot rod. My personal favorite is going to be the Phenix Black Diamond Hybrid, the 867 and the 868. So if we're seeing some of that smaller grade fish, that 867 is a really good rod for flipping out some of my lighter baits. The 868 has a little bit more backbone, a little higher up. So it just depends on what catches your eye and what rods you already have in your arsenal. Make sure whatever you're getting complements what you already have. That 8.5-foot rod is really nice for being able to throw some of your lighter presentations. So you get that little springy tip that's easier to cast, and you have a lot of people around you. Sometimes it's harder to get the casting in with the longer rods in the stern, but you can do underhand flips and definitely great for getting those overhand casts over top of people if you need to on any of your lighter presentation stuff. And then when we go to the dropper loop setup where we're using our 6, 8, and 10 ounce, you want to make sure that your rod will handle that. The Phenix Axis 780 MH or the 780H are both really, really good options. The rod rated 25 to 60. It's a really wide spectrum on the line rating, but that doesn't mean that they're fishing 60 really well. It's a really good 30, 40 pound rod. So it has that little bit of a tip so you can feel those subtle bites when you have a dropper loop and they're pecking at the squid that's just sitting down there floating around in the current. Transitions into a lot of pulling power when you do hook into some better fish in a very smooth transaction. So really when you go into the shop, you're looking for a rod that fits your price point that's going to have those characteristics, something with enough tip where it's not going to be a really aggressive, super fast rod, and then something that transitions into enough pulling power where you could pull anywhere from a 15 to a 70 pound fish out of the the area that you're fishing.
Right, and just with any other style of fishing, you want to match up the rod with the reel.
Yeah.
Heavier rod, bigger reel, and so that's just with any kind of fishing.
Yeah, pick the rod out and pair it with the reel that balances out. And, you know, like we talked about quickly, most of these setups are going to cross over with a variety of other fish in our local water. So you don't necessarily have to have, you know, one rod that only does white sea bass. It'll do a variety of other fish as well.
So hopefully this gives you a very quick and easy to understand introduction to what white sea bass fishing is. But thank you so much, Anthony, for sharing all your knowledge. And if you haven't checked out any of the bluefin tuna videos that we filmed last year, check it out right here in the corner. Thank you so much. Until next time, tie lines.